Good morning all. We're just waiting for a moment or two for people to join. I can see there's quite a few people joining now. For those that are already online, you should be able to see a survey or a poll question coming up on your screens. We just wanted to know who's in the audience today, and we'll share that with people once the survey's been filled in and understand the mix across public sector, private, academia, etc. So please, hopefully you can now see a poll coming up. I can. So please fill that in. Just give everyone a few more minutes. It still seems to be quite a number of people joining. Okay, so for those that have just joined, please fill in the survey or the poll that's just hopefully popped up on your screens, understanding who's in the audience, and we'll share that once people have filled that in. But a warm welcome to this data science webinar today. Thank you for joining us. We're delighted to have everybody here and to be talking about this fantastic work that's been achieved through this initiative. I'm Louise. I'm the Director of Applied Data and Technology at Connected Places Catapult. I'm joined today by my colleagues Tamar, Loach, Head of Data Science and Software, and also Yusuf Sohei, one of our data engineers. Our Data Science Fellowship Programme was aimed at working with local authorities to help unlock and make better use of data through more advanced data science methodologies to solve city or place-based challenges. We're delighted that the local authorities that worked with us and the data science fellows that were placed through this initiative are here today to talk us through the successes, the challenges, and the interesting problem areas tackled through this programme. Before I go on and tell you more, just to let you know that the webinar has been live streamed on YouTube, and it's also been recorded and can be made available afterwards for anyone interested. First slide, please. Okay, we can see we've got the host is sharing the poll results there for everyone to understand the audience and who we've got in the room today. So thanks for that. So in terms of the agenda for the session today, Tamar and I will spend 15 minutes now going through more of the background on the objective, the problem of the programme and the vision and the ambition that we had, as well as the methodology and the approach that we took to delivering this Data Science Fellowship Programme initiative. We'll then hand over for 30 minutes to our local authorities and fellows to go into a deep dive on the case studies or problem areas each local authority chose to take forwards. Unfortunately, Hertfordshire representatives couldn't be here today, so Tamar will cover our first project, where the team have drawn on 10 years historical data to improve the allocation of spend on road maintenance. Camden Council are then going to talk about the work that they've undertaken to better utilise data and explainable methods to better direct support to residents at risk of falling into rental arrears. Buckinghamshire are up next and will tell us about the methodology that they've developed, drawing on place and people characteristics for mapping all age social isolation. Essex is our final talk, and they're going to discuss how they have used previously unexplored data sets to understand which interventions could best help just about managing residents in Essex. And then Yusuf will lead us in a 15-minute panel discussion and Q&A. Yeah, next slide, please. Great. So, Connected Places Catapult, CPC's mission. CPC seeks to grow UK PLC, businesses and innovation across the built environment, infrastructure, mobility, well-being, and other domains that we can use to describe place. We sit in the middle or the intersection, if you like, of the public and private sector, and we look to bring new and innovative technologies emerging in the market, academia, cutting-edge research, to solve some of the most complex place-based problems. Ultimately, we're looking to spark new possibilities, new products, new services that will improve the way we all live, work, play and travel. This initiative was supported by the Applied Data and Technology team at CPC, and our team is proactively looking to identify unaddressed problems, lower barriers to adoption of data-led decision-making and innovative technologies across the public and private sectors. We're not technology-led, we're problem-led. We want the appropriate deployment of data and technology in the real world, and we seek to demonstrate approaches that develop trust, and we look to create demonstrators or projects that promote innovative approaches and demonstrate positive impacts. And our fellowship example is a really great example of this. Next slide, please. So our Data Science Fellowship Programme aims about helping our place leaders harness the power of data for solving place-based challenges of today. They're about demonstrating the value in applying the most cutting-edge techniques, data science methodologies for more robust, transparent decision-making, to enable decision-makers to better plan and utilise scarce resources and target interventions to those that would benefit most in society. We're really pleased then to be here today to share these stories. From CPC's perspective, it's been such an interesting set of problem areas to work on. We've had a large CPC team supporting, from our data scientists to our service designers and our design researchers, partnering technical expertise with human-centred design. The local authorities and fellows that we've worked with have been fantastic, and we've learned much along the journey that we're really pleased to share with you today. And on that note, I'll hand over to Tamar and the teams, and they'll tell you more about these brilliant case studies.
Hi everyone. So thanks, Louise. And I'm going to jump straight in after that introduction to talk a little bit about the aims that we had in mind when we started this kind of cohort of data science fellowships. So I'll just talk through these a little bit. So in the first instance, and really kind of front and centre, we wanted to be trialling the application of state-of-the-art data science approaches. So from sourcing data in creative ways to natural language processing, to bringing users in to understand the consequences of data science plans, thinking about how the council could bring data together in new ways and apply these advanced methods. And the selection of projects that we'll talk through, and the councils and the fellows will talk through shortly, will bring this to life a little bit. The second thing that we really wanted to achieve was to upskill existing technical teams and stakeholders. So we worked really closely with the council teams. We didn't just kind of have a separate little pop-up project that didn't fit into the current world at the council. We really wanted to trial some different ways that we could collaborate across existing technical experts, existing domain experts, with a focus on educating and upskilling. And for example, in Camden, we work really closely with Annamaria, who will speak a little later as our data science fellow. And she is already one of Camden's data engineers, and work really closely with some of the data scientists at the Catapult to bring in some of those new methods and to kind of share that with the broader team. So we're trying to leave some of these different methods behind so that the council teams can apply them to new problem areas as they appear. So this third aim is around trialling data science and subject matter expert collaboration models. So this is really about drawing on the extensive domain knowledge within the council around what's worked and what hasn't, supporting residents in the different areas that we're talking through. For example, in Hertfordshire, we had really close collaboration with the highways team, who have extensive experience over years maintaining the road network, and they worked really closely. They have a huge amount of knowledge about asset maintenance and the kind of the different factors that might be affecting how well the road network lasts after different kind of maintenance procedures. So they worked really closely with a data science fellow there to kind of bring that domain knowledge through. And our service designers were particularly good at helping to kind of bridge that gap and helping to facilitate that relationship between the kind of the data science expertise and the domain expertise, if that makes sense. Finally, Oh, no, not finally. The fourth aim there is just that we wanted to really leave behind some kind of analytical capability in a problem domain. So we didn't want to just have a short fellowship where the fellow worked on a particular problem and left behind a bit of insight, but that couldn't be kind of picked up and taken forward into the future and kind of built on. So Kieran, who was the fellow that worked in Buckinghamshire on social isolation, was a fantastic example of leaving behind some interesting analytical capability. So he built a bit of a tool to support him in his work, exploring different data sets that could be brought together to map all age social isolation. But that's something that others can pick up and kind of click through and make use of as well. So I'm sure he'll mention that a little bit later too. And finally, and this is in part what this webinar is about today, we were looking to create a narrative to help build the business case for ongoing problem-driven data science within local government. It can be really difficult to justify taking a step back and pulling in new methods and new data sources when there's a lot of business as usual and day-to-day support that is very much needed from a local authority perspective. And we were hoping that through this scheme we could really kind of create some examples of best practice around the application of data science and show the value that can be added alongside the business as usual activities that are happening on how things can fit in and drive forward positive change. Next slide, please. Brilliant. So part of the kind of start of the process of this data science fellowship is, and key to the success I think we've seen, is finding a data science fellow that has the skill set and the kind of willing to work in the kind of particular context of a local authority. It's very much been critical to the success of these projects, and each of our fellows has received really fantastic feedback from the councils and really embraced the ways of working that we're trying to support. And we found the competency framework that's shown on the screen here to be a really great starting point for finding data science candidates that are going to enjoy the kind of data problems that councils can provide, and to help selection panels find candidates who are going to make the most valuable contributions. The four kind of areas in white are the kind of key themes. So there's the kind of pretty obvious technical knowledge theme around kind of programmatic interaction with data through languages such as Python and R, statistical knowledge, mathematical fluency, knowledge of a broad range of data science methods, from kind of descriptive methods through to predictive machine learning and unsupervised machine learning methods that, for example, Darren used in Essex to look at job advert text. So there's this kind of broad modelling knowledge that data scientists usually kind of thought of as having, but there's also these three other areas. One around problem focus, which Louise has mentioned a little bit. We have a real philosophy within the applied data and technology team at the Catapult of being problem first and not led by technology or led by data. And we think that's particularly important in the context of local authority work. It can mean that it's a little slower to get to the modelling part of a data science project, but we found that it results in positive outcomes, and ultimately our aim here is to solve real problems and not simply create shinier examples of modelling that don't necessarily link to impact. And we think problem focus really helps with that. And it's something that some data scientists are more or less interested in, and we think that that's a kind of important part of setting up these kind of projects. We've talked a little bit about collaboration, and particularly it's been really nice to see all the fellows really embrace the support that the Catapult have been able to give from a human-centered design and user research perspective. We have a really big team of human-centered designers, service designers, user researchers, and people that are expert in working across different domains, bringing out knowledge from an ecosystem and building that into a project. And it's been brilliant to see how all the fellows that have been hired under this model have really kind of embraced that. We've also got this final one around insight ownership, which I feel particularly strongly about. I think it's really important, and it can be really, really difficult. And this is about if a bit of modelling happens, a bit of kind of statistical insight is found in some data. There are often quite a lot of caveats around that. There are lots of assumptions that are built into modelling, and data scientists are the kind of ultimate owners of those caveats and assumptions, and they're usually best placed to be interpreting the results of models and to be communicating those results and helping others understand what is a true insight from statistical or modelling work. So found it really, really important for data scientists particularly within an area where we can be influencing policy and strategy and really important areas that have a lot of social impact, that data scientists really kind of take hold of the insights that they find and look after them and help others understand them. So that's that final one. Okay, next slide, please. So with the programme, once our fellows in place, we've followed a kind of phase methodology with some of the components shown here. This is quite high level and maybe a reasonably typical data science project, other than perhaps some of the user research that we've popped up front. So this really, the Catapult very much kind of supported the councils in articulating the kind of initial use case or initial problem area, understanding relevant decision making and kind of theories of change around that to link in the data science modelling so that it was really targeting something that could have an impact. We move on to solution evolution, which is where the fellow really takes, really gets involved. So looking at diagnostic analysis, looking at predictive analysis, exploring different methodologies and kind of picking one and trying it out on some of the data. In some cases, very much developing new approaches in a kind of applied context. And then all the way through to getting to an output and some kind of handover, whether that's a kind of really well documented model that's really reproducible, some recommendations that very much kind of linked to stakeholders and making decisions in a particular area, or some visualization and kind of reporting and embedding of a bit of code or a bit of modeling. So this is the broad methodology that we have followed. In every case, it's been slightly different, and I think the councils and the fellows will highlight that and talk that through in the specific context that they have. Brilliant. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I was going to just briefly talk through the Hertfordshire County Council Fellowship that we've recently finished, and as Louise mentioned, unfortunately Hertfordshire can't be here today, but we wanted to flag, and they wanted their project to be kind of to be shown in this context. So this project was looking at 10 years historical data on the road network in Hertfordshire, how it's been maintained, what the performance of it has been, what the travel patterns on it have been, and what the condition of the roads has been over that time in the context of the maintenance that has been applied to them. And currently Hertfordshire have a model that they use to allocate the spend on their road network, and that model helps them prioritise where they put into place interventions, whether they go with a kind of worst first approach and fix really kind of clear potholes and clear problems that are impacting on safety, whether they like the balance between that kind of worst first and a more strategic approach that's looking to fix things that means the overall lifetime of the road network is kind of best maintained, and that they're keeping their spending in a strategic way to kind of get that long-term performance out of the road network. So one of the aims of that project was to establish if the lifetime of the roads used in that big spend allocation model are accurate, and whether they reflect the highways data that's been collected over the years. So, for example, there are assumptions in the model around particular surface types lasting a certain amount of time, and the data have not been looked at historically to kind of validate some of those assumptions. So our data science fellow spent a long time with the highways team understanding the assumptions that were in those models, which are all very much based on kind of real deep domain expertise, and working to validate some of those assumptions and add nuance to them. So bringing in data, for example, around weather, traffic, the time of year that the work's being done, things like frost, high and low temperature peaks, to add in some factors to understand if the lifetime of particular kind of maintenance procedures of particular surfaces are affected by all of these factors, and whether that can be captured in a way that can be inputted into this spend model, so that the allocation of spend is based on a real kind of data-driven understanding of how performance is affected by various factors. So that, I think, has been a really fantastic example of using a huge amount of data that the council already held, pulling that together, doing a lot of the data engineering to make sure that that was usable and useful. And there were a huge number of different data sets that needed to be pulled in to do that. So that, I think, was a positive thing in its own right. And Hertfordshire now have this data asset, this joint up data asset that they can build on and reuse for other problem areas. And the highways team specifically have found the opportunity for extending the scope of the fellowship a little bit. They're exploring some assumptions that are in the model that they hadn't looked at to begin with, and they're exploring routes with the Department for Transport to shape national best practice around road lifetime modelling, which is currently very much assumption based. So that was the first project with Hertfordshire. Now we'll move on to a slightly more detailed look at our other local authority partnerships. And I think we're starting with Mark Brennan, who's the lead data scientist at Camden Council, and Annamaria Hartman, who was our data science fellow and is a senior data engineer at Camden Council. So I think we can move on to them.
Hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Can hear you, Mark.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Tamar. So I'm Mark Brennan at the from London, lead data scientist in the data analytics team at the London Borough of Camden. I'm joined on the call by Annamaria Hartman, a senior data engineer in my team. Annamaria was the data fellow on our fellowship scheme with Connected Places Catapult. Next slide, please. Just to give you a bit of background about Camden, we're a London borough covering part of central and inner London with a population of around 270,000, and there's a relatively high turnover in that population. Whilst we have some extremely affluent areas, there are also some areas with a high level of need. Camden has a wide range of council properties. Some of them, such as the Brunswick Centre near Russell Square, are architecturally renowned. Altogether, we have about 22,000 council properties, excluding those which are now leaseholder properties. Next slide, please. And there's the Brunswick Centre I just mentioned. The Landlords service was Camden Landlords service was launched in 2019. Previously, housing officers might have focused on a specific area like housing rents. As part of the service review, there was a realization that interconnecting issues affecting tenants needed to be understood, and that it could be counterproductive to focus on rental arrears in isolation. Better use of data underpins this, and as part of the service launch, a new operational ClickSense dashboard was created, which gave housing officers an integrated insight into the data we had about them, about our tenants. ClickSense is our primary business intelligence tool. Next slide, please. At Camden, we wanted to use data science techniques to take this a step further and try and develop a predictive model which would identify those tenants likely to fall into rental arrears or those with recurring payment issues. Were there patterns in the data from those who already had a history of arrears, which would allow us to generate a prediction score of those likely to fall into arrears? Some initial work was done analysing data sets and using a random forest classification model developed in R to develop a predictive model. This also used some time series analysis to look at rental payment patterns. It was important to distinguish between irregular payment patterns, which rectified themselves of their own accord, and those which pointed to an arrears problem. Although the initial proof of concept work had been developed in R, we decided to move towards Python because of its wider use, both internally and externally. In the early stages of the project, we completed a data protection impact assessment pre-screen to ensure that what we were doing was compliant with GDPR. We, however, realised that just producing a list of tenants who are likely to fall into arrears with a score could be construed as profiling and wouldn't give the housing officer much additional insight. There was quite a lot of discussion about this. GDPR places various limitations around profiling and automatic decision-making. Whilst there would be no automatic decision-making taking place, targeting individuals with extra support just on the basis of a black box prediction could be seen as providing an enhanced service to some solely on the basis of an automatic model output lacking in human intervention. In light of this, we repivoted the project to get an understanding of the factors which can cause a tenant to fall into arrears. And the plan is to create an operational dashboard which would present the various indicators for tenants. The housing officer would then have the additional insight when having discussions with their tenants and see if any of the risk factors can be addressed either directly by the housing officers or by bringing in another service, for example, our employability team. The housing officer would then use their judgment, augmented by the data insight, to see whether extra support was required. Next slide, please. As part of the project, we worked closely with the Connected Places Catapult team. One of the challenges was understanding our different data sources and how they link together. The database schema underlying our principal housing system is very complicated, and additional information about tenants can be on multiple other systems across the council. We needed to build up a profile of the data. How complete and accurate is it? Is it fit to be integrated into a model? How can the data be joined together? What is the lineage of the data? Understanding the data sources is key to building up a data catalogue. It's important to remember the so-called 80-20 rule. 80% of a data scientist's time is spent simply finding, cleansing, and organizing data, leaving only 20% to actually perform analysis. We had some very productive user research and consequence scanning sessions with Lottie McNair and Thanos Bantis from Connected Places, together with some of the neighbourhood housing officers. Consequence scanning wasn't a technique we had used before and was a useful way of conceptualizing what the unintended positive and negative consequences of the project could be. An example of a negative unintended consequence would be that the incorrect factors are flagged up by the analysis, giving officers an incorrect picture of the level of tenant need. A positive unintended consequence could be finding an unexpected pattern in the data, which would be of use to a different service. For example, our adult social care team, allowing them to target their resources more effectively. An exercise was done to apply sentiment analysis techniques to some of the case note data, which had been recorded by housing officers. This was done using sentiment intensity, using a sentiment intensity analyzer, part of the natural language toolkit available in Python, and also the text blob library. However, Annamaria and Thanos found that there was an inconsistent use of abbreviations in the case note data. This highlights the importance of data quality in general. For example, name misspellings, incorrect date of birth, poor address formatting. This can all filter through to our data models and our analysis. It proved difficult to differentiate between positive and negative sentiment in the free text. To get around this, we want to implement a greater use of tags, which can be used in case note data so that these themes can be more easily identified. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, we had to pause the project due to a stream of urgent COVID-19 related work. We want to now restart our data science projects after this pause and reskill in Python, which quickly becomes dormant even after a brief pause. There is a renewed focus on citizen need, and arrears have been increasing in the light of the health and economic impacts of COVID-19. Also, some of the risk factors which could be contributing to arrears could be changing, as hitherto coping families are now in crisis. One practical lesson learnt is that we should introduce a pre-assessment at the start of a tenancy so that we're cited on some of the potential issues which could affect a tenant through the course of their tenancy. I hope that has given you a bit of a flavour of the work we've been doing at Camden, and thank you for your time. And all the photos shown were different parts of our housing, council housing stock, so it shows the wide range we have in the borough. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. I've really loved the Camden project, and I really thought the human-centered design and consequence scanning stuff influencing some of the data protection considerations was a really fantastic example of some of the surprising effects that can have even. Next, we have Matt Everitt and Kieran Suchak from Buckinghamshire County Council talking about mapping all-age social isolation.
Thanks, Tamar. So yeah, first slide. So I'm Matt Everitt. I'm the Head of Insight and Business Improvement at Buckinghamshire Council. So I head up the Business Intelligence team. I'm joined on this presentation by Kieran, who is our Data Science Fellow. If we could just move to the next slide, please. Okay, so this slide, Buckinghamshire, on the right, that's where we are, sort of in between Oxfordshire and Hertfordshire, population of just over half a million people. Two large towns, Aylesbury and Wickham, make up about 70% of the population, and the rest is spread through smaller towns and a rural area in the north. At the time of doing this fellowship, we were creating a new unitary that went live on the 1st of April from 5 sovereign councils, so going live sort of in the midst of the COVID, which was quite a lot of fun. But in terms of the project, so social isolation is something that we've looked at for a few years in the council previously. Complex condition, there's not a huge amount of recent research around it, but by understanding and intervening in this issue, we can improve people's quality of life and limit dependence on more costly services. It's a condition that can affect people at any age through a range of circumstances, either related to the individual and or the local community. And it has a huge impact on health, similar to obesity or smoking. The research that's available shows that social isolation is associated with a greater risk of inactivity, risk-taking behaviour, increased risk of coronary heart disease, stroke, increased risk of depression, low self-esteem, sleep problems, cognitive decline, significant health issues on an individual level. And in terms of local services, it's a key driver for demand in local services across the county and across the country. So people who are socially isolated are less likely to be able to attend scheduled appointments. They're more likely to create increased demand and use services just as a way of having social contact. They're more likely to be admitted to hospital and be in for longer when they're in. They're more likely to be a victim of crime, and they're less likely to engage with opportunities that could help to address the social isolation, things like volunteering. So we did some previous work, as I mentioned a minute ago, at the council a few years ago, using a different methodology. That previous work focused on older people only, so it had some success. We were able to target some interventions within the adult social care space around that, but it was limited. It was only for older people, and so it missed a large part of the population across the county who would be affected and experiencing those issues and driving up the demand across different services. So if we go to the next slide, please. So this is our aim, to understand social isolation in Buckinghamshire. What is it? What causes it? Who's at risk of it? Where's the risk highest? And that they were the sort of elements that we needed to understand and needed to be able to bring together and have a cohesive understanding of, so that we could develop that into actionable insight that could drive and improve the outcomes for our residents. If we go to the next slide, please. So to deliver our aim, these were the objectives that we set out to achieve through the DSF. So we needed to review existing research, identify what didn't, carry the learning from these into our study, so we didn't reinvent the wheel and we built on what had been done previously. From that, we wanted to develop a robust definition of social isolation that we all agree on, and could work to for this project. So there are various definitions of social isolation knocking around and differences, nuances between social isolation and loneliness. So we needed to get that bottomed out, which we're all working from the same definition on that side. We needed to identify relevant data sets, a really key piece of work to build on the analysis that we'd done previously. We needed to draw in different data. We wanted to be quite ambitious around that as well, given the context around joining the 5 authorities together to create a new council, given the context with our health partners as an integrated care partnership, and sort of furthering links and engagement with our voluntary and community sector. So a wider aim in my team across Buckinghamshire is to try and view Buckinghamshire as a place rather than disparate set of data sets. So we're always keen to try and join those up and make more use of those where possible, either within the council or across partners. And this was a real opportunity for us to look at that in a huge amount of detail. And we needed to develop a methodology. So we needed data science expertise, which is where we were really keen to engage with Catapult, through the fellowship. We needed that expertise to be able to come in, develop that methodology, synthesize the various data sets, determine the difference between those, see which were contributing factors, which were indicators, and then to produce the outputs, the models and the maps that we needed to be able to then turn that into actionable insight going forwards. So if we go to the next slide, so Kieran, I think we hand over to you on this one. So this is starting to go into the project approach that Kieran took when he joined us.
Yeah, so I guess following on from what Matt said in the aims side of things, and also I guess following on from what Tamar said with regards to a phased methodology, I had envisaged at the beginning of the project a methodology very similar to what Tamar outlined earlier, but I think over the course of the project, it became clear that a lot of these what I thought of as discrete elements were really just overlapping parts. So the review of the literature was something that was an ongoing process throughout the whole project. Identifying data sets carried on throughout the project as well. And ultimately, a lot of the kind of modeling and output stuff was not as much, didn't take up as much of the time as identifying data sets and understanding what was in those data sets at the beginning. But I just wanted to highlight really, there were a couple of really key moments around the workshops. So the workshops 1 and 2, which happened throughout the course of the project. In the first case, allowed us to identify potential use cases and where this work could go, who it might impact, who the key stakeholders were in this project. And I think also by identifying those stakeholders, we're also able to identify potential opportunities for data as well. Looking at the second workshop, we were able to do some kind of consequence scanning. So at this point, had a kind of a clearer idea of a methodology in mind. And at this workshop, I can then propose this methodology and explore what the consequences of this one might be, whether they be positive or negative. And ultimately, this idea of building a model was a relatively small part of the project. If we move on to the next slide, please. So going through all of those steps on the previous slide, I guess we came to these key findings. The first of which was, I guess, really importantly, an academically grounded definition of social isolation. So as Matt touched upon, there's this distinction that we have to make between social isolation and loneliness. And I think for us, the key difference was an idea of subjectivity versus objectivity. So we considered social isolation as an objective measure of people's, the quality or quantity of people's social interactions, whereas we consider loneliness to be a more subjective measure, so how people perceive the levels of those interactions. Part of the literature review also included looking at the shortcomings of previous pieces of work. So as Matt's also touched upon, one of the big issues is a lot of the previous work really focuses on the elderly. And as has become more and more apparent in previous work, this is a phenomenon that doesn't just touch the elderly, it touches a wide range of society. So off the back of that, we were really keen to ensure that this approach included people from all ages and as broad a cross-section of society as possible. But on top of that, one of the issues that came up in the previous piece of work was a conflation between the ideas of contributing factors towards social isolation and factors which were more indicators of social isolation. And that was something that I was keen to draw out as part of this work. And that last part there really, I guess, feeds quite nicely into an outline of a modeling approach that came together. So this allowed me to kind of discretize my data sets and variables into ideas between factors that contribute to social isolation, which I would consider to be input variables to my model, and indicators of social isolation, which I consider to be outputs of my model. So I've played around with a couple of different modeling approaches and ultimately settled on a geographically weighted regression approach. But I guess the other really important output of this was a visualization approach to go alongside that. So as Tamar touched upon, I developed this visualization approach over the course of my own data exploration, but over the course of the project realized that this was something that may actually become useful to the council as well. So ultimately packaged it all together such that it could represent all the data sets that were included in my scoping out of the data, but also visualize the findings that I made from my modeling approach. And this then allowed us to paint a picture of the spatial variation and relationships between contributing factors to social isolation and indicators of social isolation. So if we go to the next slide, I'll hand back over to Matt.
Great stuff. Thanks, Kieran. So this is the last slide for us then. So just touching on the next steps. So as part of a wider programme of work in this area, Public Health had scoped some interventions that would require targeting of communities where risk of social isolation is highest. So they're waiting for the outputs of this project, or going to be informed by the output of this project to see which areas they need to target those. We had hoped to complete that slightly sooner, but COVID got in the way, which had a little bit of an impact on public health capacity within Buckinghamshire. And broader than that, not just public health, given the complexity and the scale and the significance of this issue, we'll be sharing the findings with a wider audience across the council, across partners, to help inform their strategies, things like communication strategies or how we target resource collectively to people of the highest need. A couple of other next steps then, embed within BI. So we're really keen to push on and develop the skills and experience to maintain and develop the model locally, continue to acquire the data sets and further data sets to feed into it, and continue to deliver and update the analysis in this area. And the last step, consider further data integration. So we really want to build on this approach. We've just become a unitary authority. We've got lots of customer data, and this project is a bit of a flagship in terms of demonstrating the value of integrating multiple data sets and the skills and techniques and approach we would need to be able to do this. So that's it from me. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand back to Tamar.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Kieran. It's a really lovely project, and it feels like the methodology could be useful to other councils as well. So it'd be really interesting to see what you continue to do with it. Next up, I think we have Darren Coe, who was our fellow, so actually just finished at Essex County Council, exploring how we could use new data sets to support those that are just about managing in Essex. And Darren will explain a little bit more about what that means. Over to you, Darren.
We go. Muted. There we go. Thank you, Tamar. So I'm Darren. I'm the data science fellow who worked with the ECC over the past 3 months. Perhaps we can just go to the next slide. Okay, so the purpose of this project was to identify job skills demand within Essex using publicly available jobs data. And that jobs data was sourced from indeed.co.uk, which is one of the top online jobs boards nationally. And the techniques that we applied here were natural language processing techniques, and in this case, topic modeling, to really derive those job skills from that data. And each step of this process, I collaborated and engaged with the ECC domain experts to just interpret those job skills, but also to make sure it remained relevant to Essex. And that helped us get to these two conclusions from this project, which were firstly to deliver evidence-based adult community learning skills training for targeted improvements in specific districts within specific job skills. And then secondly, to establish a longer term monitoring of job skills trends across each Essex district to guide the provision of ECC services going forward, and also better inform strategic policy going forward as well. Go to the next slide. This is just an outline of the project structure that was undertaken. So the project really wanted to identify job skills from 12,000 Indeed.co.uk jobs and from 3 employer interviews that were conducted during this 3 months. And we sought to really understand the trend of job skills demand within each Essex district. So you can see here over this kind of very broad 3-month time frame, there were various stages to this project. So you can see the analysis and interview design, and just making sure that we spend enough time structuring and ensuring that this particular project would have the right data sources involved, and also they were sufficiently comprehensive in order to derive the right conclusions from that data. And then in June, there were 2 work streams which were run concurrently. So firstly, quantitative analysis, where topic modeling was applied to these Indeed.co.uk jobs, and then qualitative analysis, where themes were extracted from these employer interviews. And I did rely very much on the Catapult technical experts to just support that particular process. And when we moved into the conclusions and recommendation stage, I very much did reach out to the ECC domain experts to really draw upon that wealth of knowledge and experience, and to ensure that, again, the conclusions and recommendations that were drawn remain very relevant to Essex and aligned with the policies of Essex going forward. And that's how we came to that recommendation around evidence-based skills training to be provided by the Adult Community Learning Department. So if we go to the next slide now. This is just a very high-level overview of how the topic modeling worked within this particular project. So the job listing here, this is just an example of one of the job listings from Indeed.co.uk based out of Essex, and it's been read by the model. So you can see with the red highlight there, those are the keywords that have been extracted by the topic model, and it does that for every single one of the 12,000 job listings that have been extracted from Indeed.co.uk. And after that, it takes each of those sets of keywords and then it groups it according to its own understanding of the coherence and, I guess, the meaning that it's able to interpret from those groupings of keywords. And that's done using an LDA model. Now, those groupings of keywords need to be, again, interpreted by a domain expert in order to ascribe a certain job skill to those keywords. So in this particular stage, in number 3, you can see on this slide here, where you have, say, support, child, people, service, team, experience, and so on, those other keywords. And those have been extracted from the job descriptions that we've seen above, and they've been grouped in that particular way. However, we very much relied on those domain experts to inspect visually each of these groupings and then provide an appropriate job skill title or label to each of these groupings of keywords. And so, I just want to highlight, as you can see in that black box above, it's really important that these particular domain experts were engaged and involved throughout this process, because without them, this interpretation wouldn't have been possible. And then, however, because topic modeling is actually a unsupervised technique, there were situations where the groupings of keywords were in fact nonsensical or a bit incoherent, and those were discarded during the process of investigation. If we go to the next slide now. So these were actually the top 8 skills that were derived from the Indeed.co.uk jobs. So we can see here there's things like customer service, caring, personable, and so on. And whilst these are sort of not very mind-blowing, they do, I guess, make sure that the project is really grounded in reality. These are skills that we do recognize and that we do understand. However, the more interesting part of this slide is on the right-hand side. So you can see here, we have the top 3 most common job skills demanded across Essex. So customer service, personable skills, and technical skills. So if Essex wanted to apply a very broad brush to this particular intervention and actually deliver skills training focused on these 3 skills alone across the entire of Essex, this would be the sort of impact that it would have to each of the districts. And you can see in some districts here, those particular 3 job skill sets actually represent nearly more than 50% of all the jobs that are available within certain districts. So that would have a very big kind of impact. However, it's not very targeted. And I think one key point to note is, despite having this understanding very broad macro level across Essex, this is very difficult to implement in real life, because running such a large intervention across the whole of Essex will be very expensive. So if we go to the next slide, we'll look at how we made it a bit more granular. So you can see here, say the most common job skills, such as customer service, we can see there's a greater concentration in the southern region, according to the heat map that you see in red on this particular slide. Whereas if you compare that with the northeastern region of Essex, there's a noticeably lower demand, i.e. a lighter shade of red. However, when we then look at, say, another lens, another job skill, for personable skills, the green map here, you can see that the northeastern region has a higher demand for those particular job skills. Whereas in the southern region, there is then a lesser demand. So that's really interesting to see at district level, because now the ECC can be a bit more targeted in where they deliver or where they choose to reposition the skills training throughout the Essex County. And then what we've done on the second row of charts, you can see from those Parivo style charts there, we've tried to characterize each of the districts within Essex so that it's easy to understand where the differences lie. And it's actually a very visual a way of demonstrating these differences. So we can see here for Colchester on the left-hand side, the demand for customer service skills is actually a bit lower when, say, comparing to, say, Epping. And that's just very visible given when we compare the shape of the plots. And so we're able to do this across the entire of Essex with the heat map as shown above. And then we're also able to characterize each district with that radar plot below. If we go to the next slide, so I think just to sort of quickly go over, I guess the key takeaway for this project for me was to deliver a evidence-based data science solution to real-world problems. And I didn't want to create or work on a project which focused too much on having this magic black box where it's a very opaque system and there's no evidence of how decisions and how information was really extracted. And so I wanted to make sure that I was involving the ECC throughout each step of this process. And I think it was a great opportunity again for me to work within this public sector organization, especially during COVID, dealing with the work from home situation and coming into such a large organization, but being able to navigate through each stage of this project. And to be honest, I was very grateful for how ECC were so generous with their time and generous with giving me the opportunity to find the right people and also find the right data sets in order to get this done. If we go to the next slide. So this is just a few slides from ECC about what they plan to do next with the project. So given that it provides district level targeting, the adult community learning service can now reposition existing skills training to the appropriate districts. There's also a bit of focus around how to assist this, just about managing this JAM cohort. So this is a vulnerable demographic who they're trying to intervene and improve the circumstances for. So this is very helpful for that particular part of the ECC as well. And then lastly, on the right-hand side, you can see this, this point about reproducible analytical pipeline. So this really, I think, pertains to the longer term monitoring of job skills trends over time. And what we've provided through this project is access to a publicly available data source where they can extract and monitor this information when and as they need to. And this just gives them another opportunity within their armory of data sets to make better decisions and better position the ECC going forward. So I think we just go to the last slide now. So I think the benefits of the DSF to the Essex County Council and how the format was really helpful for them was firstly, as a fellow, I wasn't really involved with the day-to-day operations of the ECC. So I was very much focused as a dedicated resource to bringing this project to fruition and delivering a meaningful impact. So I think that was helpful for them to in some quote unquote isolate me in a way that I'm insulated really from the comings and goings of the day-to-day operations. I think what I tried to make clear throughout this particular project as well is that I tried to involve all the different stakeholders within the ECC, whether they were senior or working level, and also relying on many, many different parts of the ECC and drawing upon their expertise. I think without that collaboration, it would have been harder for me to, I guess, really ground the project into the right principles and along the right lines of ECC policy that needed help. But then also it gave the ECC data team a chance to really come along that journey and take key learning opportunities as well. So whether that's learning a bit more about NLP or using Python and so on. And I think the communication part of this project was really, really critical, and ensuring that, making sure that each of these decisions, whether that's decisions about the rationale of the project or decisions around the modeling style or the modeling techniques used, and then communicating the recommendations as well, having that clear link and interaction with the ECC at each stage was really important to ensure that the entire team was really brought forward, and that the foundation has now been laid for this methodology to be used in the future, and then they can rely on this going forward. So yeah, that's really this project. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Darren. That was brilliant. I think you've done a fantastic job of really getting to the point where you're like directly talking to stakeholders that can implement some of this. It's really brilliant to see. So I think we're running slightly over. I think if everyone in the panel could put their cameras on, we're very happy to take a few questions. The Q&A function is at the bottom right of my screen, and I think most screens on Zoom. And Yusuf will take over in terms of reading out some of the questions that we've had so far, and any others that come in. If people want to keep posting them, he will filter them and read out the best ones that we can have.
Yeah, I don't think I should be trusted with quality control on the questions. I'll try and group them. But there seems to be one here, I guess, for the people based at the council about how ready the data is for data science and the kind of data practices, and if you guys learned anything during these fellowships. So that's Mark and Matthew, to do with implementing scalable data science solutions about your own data.
Shall I just put a few points on? Yeah, data quality is always one of our big challenges. Finding where the relevant data is, understanding codes in the system, dealing with gaps in the data. But data quality is a big issue. And we have programs in place to try and address that. We've now got dedicated data custodians, and are looking at we use the lessons learned from these projects to try and feedback and improve data quality, ideally at source. We don't want to sort of massage data quality issues. If there's something, we address it at source if possible, then that benefits all.
Cheers. Matt.
Yeah, just from our perspective, so it's very similar to what Mark was saying. Yeah, data quality is a challenge. I think maybe just to add to Mark's answer, one of the ways that we're looking to address that is by integrating data. So if we have customer data across multiple different systems, can we use a data science, data engineering approach to automate those processes so that cleansing's done in the background and it doesn't occupy that 80% that we've seen in the previous presentation.
Awesome, thanks. I guess Tamar and Louise, there's a couple of questions about how to get involved in and what a data science fellow kind of pathways like. So have you got a quick summary if anyone is thinking about getting involved, either being a fellow or a council?
I think just to reach out to myself or Tamar at this moment. So we are, this webinar marks the close of this cohort, and now we're looking at new opportunities and new ways to reshape what we've done, all of the learnings that we've gathered along the way, and work with others. So yeah, please do reach out.
Awesome, thank you. I guess I've got a question. I think I'm allowed to do that as the panel host. Ask my own question to data science fellows, and about what was the hardest non-technical challenge I guess you faced in this whole project? So Kieran, Darren, Annamaria.
I'll start. It's Annamaria here. I think the first hurdle was actually understanding what the problem was and what the actual question we wanted to answer. And once we sort of got that sorted out, then it was understanding how the actual department worked, and especially because it was a new section that was coming up, they still had the possibility of sort of redesigning what they wanted to do. So it was a good opportunity that we ran sort of run in parallel to find out what they wanted and how we could actually attack the problem.
Awesome. Kieran?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would largely echo that. I think data scientists are known for kind of having a lot of the technical skills. And I think, as Louise pointed out at the very beginning, one of the key parts to these projects is that these are problem oriented, right? And what's really important is that the solutions that come out of them are applicable to the problems that we're tackling. So I think, I wouldn't necessarily call it that it's hard, it's an enjoyable part of the project, but it's definitely a time-consuming part of the project where you have to actually get in there and understand at a much deeper level what the problem is. And that's, in my case, kind of doing that literature reviewing part of it. Because social isolation is not, on an academic level, is not something that I work on every day. It's something that I kind of came to for this project. So kind of spending time to embed myself in that kind of academic field was definitely a time-consuming part. And then being able to interact with kind of stakeholders and partners within the council and understand the ramifications for them. It's again not something that I do on a daily basis, but it's something that's really, really important as part of the project.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's something common across fellowships. Darren?
Yeah, and I guess, not trying to reiterate what everyone said. So I think scoping is super important for this particular project, making sure that the client, being the council, is happy with the work that's being done. I think that's super important, and making that clear at the front of the project. I think more focusing on the stakeholders though, I think the level of understanding or expertise of data science varies throughout the council, and ensuring that all stakeholders or decision makers are also kind of looking at the project in the right way is important, and something that I had to spend a lot of time on to make sure that firstly, this isn't the perfect solution that's going to be created within 3 months, and very much it's an ongoing process. So that cultural leaning for having data science included in more processes going forward, and really appreciating what it can and also cannot do is something I had to really work on. But overall, it was a very positive experience. Yeah.
Glad to hear. I think if we have the last couple of questions, there's some good ones coming in. I guess Mark, Matt and Tamar, about the role of data science in local government. And if we look at the future and, your dream world, how does data science affect or help local government, and what capacity would that be, especially looking at public data and opening up that data? Should we start with Tamar? Sorry, I've just got to point to people.
Yeah, I was wondering if anyone was going to jump on that one. From my perspective, I've at Connected Places, we work across a lot of industries. We have lots of domains that kind of make up our Connected Places, and I think local authorities are kind of really key stakeholders within that sit across a lot of those domains too. And it's therefore been really exciting to work in partnership with them on some of these challenges. It feels like, and I see a couple of questions coming in around COVID, it feels like the kind of data sharing agenda is even more at the top of people's priorities at the moment, and getting those processes smoothed out so that we can support lots of different use cases in the future, I think is really positive. I think the fellowship has shown how we can do some of that, but I think we can do a lot more, and I'd be very hopeful that local authorities hold huge amounts of really important data that, if brought together in the right way, can support so many use cases within the domains that we're interested in, from infrastructure to supporting residents very specifically with things like social isolation that have a huge kind of cascading consequences across all the council's domains. And data is a really good kind of unit of connectedness to help us think across those domains. So I'd be excited by that. I'm sure Mark and Matt can talk specifically from a local authority perspective on that layer.
Yeah, so I guess from my perspective, it's exactly that. It's using those skills to the benefit of our residents and trying to make the best use of the data that we've got. So we had some context around that in terms of our unitary programme and the timing of the fellowship that we partnered with, and that's brought into a bit of a sharper focus, really, although it may have delayed the impact of our project. But through COVID, that bit around actually, well, what information have we got? What data have we got? How do we make best use of that? How do we make sure it's up to date and clean and integrated as best as possible? And I think that's the sort of skill that Kieran brought very much to the fellowship, and that's what we want to try and build on and take forward.
Amazing. Mark?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential, especially in the COVID space, to try and understand any patterns in our data, which could, what's changing with our residents, for example, like rental arrears patterns. Are there already patterns we can discern because of what's happened? I think just a sort of on a note of caution with data science and local authorities would be, we have to be really careful that we're doing stuff which is GDPR compliant, making sure that just because we can do something, there's a question of legally can we and should we, is it how citizens have entrusted us with their data? And the other thing is also not to create something too complicated. We're not a big bank. We haven't got huge teams, so we want to maintain something which is, create something which is understandable and maintainable. If the people doing it sort of rush off to Google, which is next door, or virtually next door, something maintainable, suitable for the scale of our organisation.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Throughout all these fellowships, you kind of need that explainability that sometimes private companies aren't open to or aren't required to do so. I think it's a really good point about the risk and being careful when employing these models. We're coming to the end of it. I thought it might be appropriate, thank you so much to the councils, but for the data science fellows to tell us about their biggest breakthroughs, because it's honestly been amazing to see everyone do such different projects. I'd like to know what they're going to take away from this project and what they're particularly proud of. Should we do the same order? Annamaria, go for it. Or not? Kieran, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute.
No problem.
All right. Yeah, the biggest sort of impact was that it really is an exciting area to get involved in, and to have the sort of opportunity to learn so different scopes within the council, and to feel that you're actually doing something that is positive and helpful for our community.
Amazing. Kieran?
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me it's kind of similar, really, because my background is very much in academia previously, so I'm doing a PhD at the moment, and from my background, it's very common for people to kind of get stuck in a very kind of isolated academic setting and not really have any tangibility to their work. But to be able to kind of come to the council and be able to see the impact of the work, I mean, things like the stakeholder events, seeing the diversity of people at those events was really, really interesting. It makes you realise how wide-spanning some of these problems are and how much of an impact some of these solutions can have. So I think it's a really, really interesting experience, and I think it makes me want to actually ensure that the work that I do going forward does have tangible impact. So yeah, it's a really interesting takeaway from the project.
Yeah, amazing to hear.
Yeah, and I think I mirror some of Kieran's thoughts as well about having impact in projects going forward. It was really great to see that. Number one, I've had a nice insight into how policy is really formed within local authorities, And that's something I didn't really have exposure to prior to this particular fellowship. And then having that greater appreciation, but then understanding that I've now contributed like a very, very small part, but overall I've been able to contribute this small brick to the overall foundation of building policy going forward is really satisfying. So I think, look, going forward, I'll ensure to look for other opportunities to use these data science skills to do similar things in the future. Yeah.
Amazing, thank you all. I think Louise is gonna see us out. Just want to say thank you to everyone involved in the fellowship. It's been really awesome to see.
Yeah, I will. I'm very conscious that we have run over, but we did start late, so I will sort of give some final reflections. I think that was 4 fantastic talks, and thank you to everyone who's spoken today. I've really enjoyed hearing particularly about the lessons learned along the journeys that we've all taken here, some of the data governance, ethics and privacy considerations that Mark highlighted. Also really enjoyed hearing about where these projects are going. It's really nice to see those next steps. You know, we're just coming to the end of what's been a journey, if you like, across these 4 projects, and one that was somewhat delayed by COVID, etc., that's been highlighted. So it's really nice to see where these projects will hopefully go next, and we look forward to hearing more about that also. But I've also really enjoyed hearing from the fellows, both in terms of, I think it was really nice hearing about what they were looking to get out of this, and also what they did get out of it and some of the challenges there. So yeah, just a really big thank you to all of our speakers today. Really enjoyed hearing about it. Thank you for sharing your work, but also a big thanks to the audience and your time today, and the really great Q&A session. So thanks all. And on that, I will close slightly late, but thank you all for the time. And on that, I'll close this session.